Hey, bird watchers. In this episode, we're going to dive into how modern brands are integrating localization into the very fabric of their identity, from live content and real-time translation to product launches and executive keynotes. James Jameson, Chief Commercial Officer at CaptionHub, shares insights on how companies can build localization resilience and why thinking globally from the start is no longer optional. We're going to discuss the risks of lagging localization, the promise of automation, and how content in every language reinforces or breaks your brand. James, thanks for taking time. We've been trying to schedule this for some time
I
now. I'm
I
finally glad to have
know.
you here.
First of all, just a huge thank you, both for the invitation, but also for your flexibility and patience over the last couple of months. It's just been, a crazy sort of 2-3 months for us at Caption Hub. I think when we last spoke, I was hoping that I could insert this recording whilst we were out at reInvent in Vegas. And we were just sort of before this talking about sports and NBA and so on, and we just end up being completely swamped in conversations out there at reInvent because of the growth of localization across the sort of sports and broadcast sector. So unfortunately, we had to pin it to January. Here we are, last day of January, second to last day of January. So yeah, I'm really pumped to have a conversation with you, Dan.
Now, I know what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but tell me about reInvent. How was it? Any insights, anything that you want to, bring up here?
reInvent, for those audience members that haven't been to reInvent, this is the Amazon Web Services, AWS. reInvent is their flagship. Event is the wrong term for it. It's a city landscape over 5 days. Amazon Web Services basically take over the Strip in Las Vegas for 5 days, and most of the hotels are fully branded in AWS reInvent collateral. There is reInvent marketing everywhere. It's really, an AWS city for 5 days. In AWS and Vegas, they don't do things in halves. They do, everything is big in Vegas. So you add AWS into the mix, and everything is really big. It's so fascinating what's happening in the market right now, particularly where sort of AWS are positioning in terms of what they see as their growth verticals in the sort of media, entertainment, gaming, sports arena. We are seeing large sports organizations like the NBA, like Bundesliga, just entering a completely new world of distribution, and distribution where monetization, I'm going to talk about this a lot, monetization and localization, that coefficient between those two is very, very tight. And so lots of these sports organizations really driving for that global competitive growth of audience capture. And how best to do that? Well, we know, Dan, we just need to tell everybody else. It's localization, of course. So there was a lot of that at reInvent, a lot of talk about agentic, and providing that layer of sort of conversational agentic on top of the application. So a really, really interesting few days, very sort of thought-provoking, and lots of good conversations.
That's amazing. Back in my college days, I used to manage a used bookstore in Jersey City, in Jersey here, and we used to use half.com, which was a little Amazon product at that time. So it's amazing to see how Amazon has grown since those late 90s into what it is today. It's been fascinating, to good job, Mr. Bezos. You've done well for
Good,
yourself.
good job. And he really does drive that sort of Bezos virtuous circle is in AWS. You can, as an AWS client, buying any partner technology from the AWS marketplace, then obviously that has a sort of drawdown on your AWS commit. So he's created this sort of win-win-win ecosystem, which from an ecosystem, I'm a very much pro ecosystem, being a sort of biochemist by trade, and biologist by trade, sort of back in the day. And so, the software system, the business system is an ecosystem. Just being aware of that and allowing that symbiosis is really, really important. And I think reInvent and AWS, they capture that really well.
That's a story in and of itself. How the hell did you end up in this industry?
That is, I'm afraid that is for podcast number two.
That's amazing. I mean, listen, I always marvel as my degree's in history, and and it's just like, all
Well,
right,
I could pose you that I could ask the same question.
But again, let's talk some interesting stuff that you brought up, and I think it ties into the core essence of why I have you on, and I've seen you speak before, and I've read stuff that you've put out there, and I think that there is. I not to say that we're at this inflection point. Maybe the inflection point's been having, but like the fact that like organizations, specifically brands, are seeing tremendous value in how things are communicated in different languages for them, and they're really focusing in now on not just as a translation cost or a localization cost, but a localization value. Now, of
Mhm.
course, automation, AI, all of that plays a part. You gotta, be able to bring the value without breaking the bank. So I guess that's a question for you is how do you when balancing out, of course, the cost side of things and everything, and what brands are trying to accomplish, how do you communicate like the quality versus speed versus scale and the trade-offs and all of that when in your branding and sales narrative, like what's the concept there,
I mean, this is another, another question and conversation topic that could be a thesis, right? It's the topic of so many discussions right now. You're looking at the BBC television having its 100th year birthday, and in the same week, the BBC announcing that they're breaking their own red lines and moving some of their content distribution to YouTube. We're seeing other public service broadcasters move in that direction in the UK. It's such a fascinating space right now, and asking the question, where does the trade-off lie between scale, audience capture, growth, monetization, speed to market? It really depends on depends on the individual brand, and there is so much variability. What we try and get across very simply at CaptionHub, look, we're a technology platform and we can support the demands of our clients. So for some of our clients, some of our customers, that demand might be pixel perfection. It might be 100% accuracy across all of their 25 languages. For others, it might be their first foray into any sort of form of captioning or localization. It might be a very greenfield approach. And it might be, that they might be at the very start of their sort of localization maturity matrix, as it were. Really different quality levels are acceptable. From a personal perspective, I'd much rather, content be available in a language that I speak than not available at all. So the barrier shouldn't be quality alone. We don't have any really sort of entrenched philosophy here at CaptionHub to promote perfection in all cases. That's really not what we're saying, but we do support that if that needs to be the case. But for some companies, that can be the enemy of good. So it really depends what you're trying to achieve as a business. If perfection is your requirement, and so be it. If speed to market and scale across dozens of languages in a very short period of time is your ambition, then we can support that as well. It's got to be driven by the business, as always. It's got to be driven by the business and the business needs and the strategic needs of the client. One of the key questions for us that we ask our clients is, how can you scale depending on your use case without the overheads, but at the same time with confidence? Confidence, quality is such a broad term, but quality of linguistics, quality of resilience of your technology and your workflows, your technologies that underpin your workflows, your broadcast workflows, knowing that you're doing the best that you can with your language that you're automating into, if you are using automation and AI. Languages are really hard to make. And if you overlay that with multimedia, you've got two very, very complex domains working at the same time. And to get that right, it's really hard. And so there are some companies that are very, very far ahead on that sort of execution curve. The top companies in the world are doing this incredibly well, and we work with those companies, and they teach us as much as we supply them the technology every day. So we learn from them. And we try and pay that back into the world by giving that what we're learning and putting back into the product to those who are sort of lower on the maturity matrix, and sort of taking this sort of greenfield approach and starter approach to localization.
Yeah, and I think to just kind of tap into that too, I think not all content is equal. And I think that once an
Yeah.
organization or a brand realizes that, I think they've unlocked a tremendous potential of this content needs to be treated this way, this content needs to be treated this way, this content needs to be treated this way. And then, of course, through automation and being able to route things dynamically to where they need to go in terms of, the quality and speed and all of that. Um, that's where I think brands are starting to succeed as well, is so much more content is being created now too. And AI has been able to unlock the content creation. But then again, it's some content is being created just for it's not SEO anymore. What is it? GEO? Like it's to be ingested by LLMs.
Yeah, the
You know,
AEO, I think is
yeah,
HubSpot
AEO.
termed
That
it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I
Is
came up with
that it?
my own
Yeah,
terminology that I was writing out last year on, which was AEIO. But yeah, but
yeah.
essentially, it's still creating the content to be discovered out there on the digital net. So
Right. So in that capacity,
it's
then
a
it's just different than the quality of branding where you're just like there are millions of eyes on this that's watching a worldwide broadcast of the Super Bowl or World Cup or something like that. That's different between the content that is just being used to kind of like generate
yeah.
search engine optimization. Yeah.
But where is it different, and how is it different, and how should that content be governed in either a different way or in the same way? It's a really interesting set of dynamics that are occurring right now. If you are to say that you're at the edges of your organization, the edges of your organization are now essentially very enabled to be content creators. What does that do to your governance schema for content creation, and then for localization governance, where you would typically sort of traditionally have content governance centralized and governance per se centralized, whether it's risk, financial, operational, or localization. You tend to think about command and control in a centralized nature in business. And the fact that we now have tools that are content creation tools with AI built in that
Hmm.
give individuals at the edge of an organization the ability to create content rapidly just creates huge opportunity, but then also a new challenge for the organization to think about governance. Like, how do we make sure that we're happy with this content going out to the wide world so that we can leverage that speed to market, so that we can let this technology be part of our organization without being concerned and worried about what we're putting out there. And that's a really interesting, I think, like what Blackbird are doing at the moment in terms of that fabric, and everything you're doing around data governance is super fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge talking point for us going into 2026 and being engaged with, great partners like you and great customers and seeing some of the risks and challenges that are out there and understanding that, like, I think one of our customers said to this, you can't put the genie back into the bottle. Like it's out there. What you can
Yeah,
do though is have your eyes and ears and monitoring it. So, what we're doing with Blackbird and Black Lake, our latest product, it is plugging into all these environments, not telling people you can't do this because you can't stop them from doing that, but at least having
right.
oversight and understanding of the activities, understanding the risk of these things, and then plugging in, you know, efficiencies and workflows as needed once a risk threshold is hit. And so I think that taps into a lot of what I love about, like, a partnership with CaptionHub too, is because there is the flexibility on your side too to kind of like configure these different workflows. So depending on, hey, this work stream has been determined X risk, we can run it through our integrations together and do a different workflow than, oh, this is for this, and then it has to have a level. I hear that human in the loop is falling out of favor, human in control, or whatever the new term is. It's all these buzzwords, but having a higher level of human involvement can go down this path too. And I think that's a huge opportunity for organizations that have this this challenge, and I think it's going to be more and more and more as this year goes on, that more companies are, maybe they don't even realize it. Maybe they don't even realize how much of this
Maybe
shadow
there will be
localization stuff is going on,
right.
you know?
There will be organizations on the left-hand side of the bell curve that haven't realized yet, and there will be organizations on the right-hand side of the bell curve that realize that actually enabling this and enabling the people that want to move fast on content creation is exactly what they got out of bed to do in the first place. You know, so many organizations just want to go to market faster, but then they're held up by their own bureaucracy internally. But what happens if you go at the speed as an organization, at the pace of the people who want to move fast, the pace,
Mhm.
let the content creators be the pace setters and don't have the technology being, a blocker to that, which is we've seen that in industries in the past, but we can really provide that sort of governance and orchestration framework for content creators to align with a certain level of quality, to ensure that terminology is being adhered to, but then still allow that creativity to happen at the edge so that we're taking content out to the market more quickly. And that is going to be the competitive edge for competing on a global platform, this decade. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, and it, again, I'm sure you've seen companies make mistakes or brands make mistakes about trying to go multilingual too fast. And I'd love to have your insights on this. And but there has to strike a balance there, because that old saying is, you don't have to be best, you have to be first. I think that's quasi true. I think you have to
Mm.
be quick, but you still got to be really good, because if you're bad out of the get go, especially with your multilingual content, it could be kind of detrimental to your brand. So, any insights onto, what you've seen from mistakes that brands have made by trying to go too fast?
No, this is it's a really interesting question. In my experience over the last 9 years here at CaptionHub, brands don't move too fast. And it's not always that the mistakes come from moving too fast. It's typically from gaps in workflow, in quality control. But that doesn't come through just rushing things through. That's what we might sort of guess is the case, but isn't it in my experience? I think most brands, by the time they're established, and we work with enterprise brands, right? So we're working with established brands. We do work with the scale up vertical as well, who have been around for 4 or 5 years and are rapidly going through that sort of post Series E sort of level. But typically we're working with brands where there's brand equity. And because of that, they've reasonably so built up a level of caution, risk aversion into their operations. They need to protect that brand. That's their sort of, that's their value. So, we have seen the odd brand in our portfolio really go for it, and want to sort of localize all of their content overnight. We've seen one particular brand in the education space, very well known consumer education play, and they wanted to localize their entire back catalogue into 25 languages, 10,000 hours, and just do that with AI. With no human in the loop at all, and just turn that on overnight. And we were able to support that. That was a very clear commercial decision by them to go very, very quickly overnight, reach multiple territories, expand their content into different languages, and it really reaps rewards. They're still getting a very high quality of machine transcription and machine translation, but then with the tools and technologies that we bring along with that, natural captions technology, the sentence level translation, ability to add term bases and custom dictionaries, and language styling and profiling, you can still go very, very quickly. So my experience is actually most customers actually will just go very slowly or too slowly, and they're not willing to take that risk. But when we've seen the customers that want to take that risk and do that jump, then it's really paid off for them. It usually comes down to an anxiety about, by a few people in the organization who are not willing to take that to do a huge jump. I would also just say conversely on that one very quickly that also in our experience, in a different sense, the best brands that we work with, the Nvidias of this world, the large sporting organizations, the Mag 7, they are more than open to taking risks. They just know how to measure the risk. They have genuine innovation and that willingness to try things in production, but it's a case of understanding what it is, how to run an experiment properly and how to manage that and mitigate for the risks. I'll give you a very quick story on this. Recently, the Augusta National Golf, who run the Masters in the US, and we have a relationship with them. At this point last year, we weren't providing any real-time captions for them. We had a phone call from their head of distribution on a Thursday afternoon. Happened to be in New York at the same time. And he said the OB truck, the broadcast truck, had just arrived at the golf tournament, and the captioning encoder, because traditionally in the production space, captioning is done with rack encoders, right? You put them into a rack and you plug the cable in. You might have a redundant one and you pay for that to be shipped in, and somebody comes in and they code in Linux into the front of it and you get English captions out. Very hardware-y, very, very difficult to scale. And that encoder hadn't arrived in the truck. So we get a call from a very, very stressed head of distribution. And within an hour, we had essentially our own technology spun up, integrated into their video production pipeline, captioning, pushing out to their entire audience, and the ability to then turn that into 250 languages, which you absolutely don't get with an encoder, hardware encoder. So that level of, okay, we have a problem, we need to solve for it. What's the worst that can go wrong here? Plus a level of trust and credibility with the people providing the method in the experiment. Those things they provide confidence to move faster, I think is what I'm trying to say. So that was a pretty cool anecdote. We like that story here at CaptionHub.
That's really cool too. And yeah, it's funny too. It's again, like, it's fascinating to hear these stories and to hear, the evolution of captioning too, because, when I was growing up again, I still remember watching like PBS and just like available in closed captions and stuff like that. And like that was the very early stages of me understanding that there was an accessibility issue, that people needed these captions. Now, I don't know if I'm just getting older and my hearing is going. I don't think I can watch anything without captions. I feel like there's a value add now, the dynamic of any content, like having, even in English, just for me, like having these captions and like, I don't know, especially maybe at late at night, my kids are sleeping and I'm watching like Game of Thrones or something like that, or something loud, and, and I was like, I just need the captions to read along. But it's great to see like where this has become, again, like it started off in accessibility, and now this is a core part of essence of growing a brand. What's kind of your as a history guy, what's your historical take on this? Like, what are you seeing there?
It's so fascinating. Like, we could talk about the history. I'm sitting here, by the way, while I'm talking to you, Dan. I'm in the UK, in London, and I'm just looking out over Oxford Street, and I'm minutes away from the BBC headquarters. Sort of television central. The history of this and of captioning within broadcast is fascinating, but it's having a real renaissance moment. And I think what you've just said there, and how you consume subtitles and captions and how important it is, I'd imagine many people watching this podcast will land with them, right? I mean, that's exactly how I consume subtitles and captions. It's partly that I'm getting a little bit older, so I like to have the captions on. My daughter has a hearing issue, and so she has the captions on because her brother talks whilst the television's on. But also the kids are upstairs asleep at night, and I'm watching something loud, and but that's a new mode. Yeah. If you think about, where television and film was 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have so much choice. We weren't watching, all of these different episodes of Game of Thrones at night and able to binge on a Friday night. So there are lots of different dynamics converging that really it's giving captioning its renaissance period. Captioning is, and we are seeing this with all of the very largest brands are using captioning to some degree. How they can make that better and available in all of the languages for their customers is the next question for them. How can you get the core languages and then the longer lead languages built into that broadcast workflow? But it really is having this sort of, I don't think I would have had an interesting conversation with somebody about captioning 5 years ago, but there's something about this moment where people are starting to turn the
Yeah.
captions on. It's really having this sort of refresh.
Yeah, I remember there was a little bit of like an aha moment to me when I was I did some e-learning stuff, right? So I was putting together, e-learning content, and just the realization of talking to people that were, consuming training materials, and like, well, I'll listen in Chinese, but I'll turn the captions on in English because then it helps me also learn English. And it was just like, whoa,
Yeah,
there's just like so many different uses
use
of
cases.
use cases for captioning. And then now, yeah, it
Right.
feels like it's embedded into the media culture nowadays. And I think that's awesome. I think that it's really cool. And I guess, for live content specifically, and what you're seeing now, and the use cases you're seeing now, what's that kind of look like over the next couple of years of how captioning and live content and how that continues to grow?
Yeah, it's we operate obviously in the real-time environment and the recorded video, the VOD on demand environment. Real time is it's just surging. It's such a growth area. It's super interesting. Again, particularly if you're looking at things like real time events where you're seeing those sort of real time live growth drivers for the likes of Netflix. We're seeing, there was the climbing episode last week. There was the boxing show just before Christmas last year. We've got racing, we've got football. That real time sports and making that entertainment available in your own language. That's the next chapter of growth for media and for sports and entertainment. So I don't see that slowing down. But at the same time, that broadcast technology ecosystem is complex. There are different companies will do it in different ways. They will have their own technology stacks, their own quality thresholds. But the growth drivers are there. The underlying market dynamics are essentially, as always, about what people want, what their sort of basic desires are in an investment parlance, what's recession proof. Sports, gaming, those are things that are recession proof. People want that very high dopamine hit entertainment, and sports gives you that real-time live environments, watching traitors. I know that's not necessarily real time, but it's got that sense of I'm living in the moment. Something is happening. The rest of the country is watching this as I'm watching along. There's a community feeling to it. So making that community go across borders, across language borders, that's where the localization chapter comes into it, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. And I want to be conscious of time because it's a Friday we're recording. It's afternoon for you. I imagine the pub is calling, so I don't want to keep you too much. So I got one more question, and it has to do actually with partnerships, and a lot of the engagement that we have on the enterprise customer side is same thing. When you think about AI has unlocked a lot of potential, it's also unlocked this idea of I want flexibility in how I'm solutioning something. So these enterprise customers don't want to be necessarily locked into a one vendor approach, which is why strategic partnerships and things like Blackbird and CaptionHub together exist, is to allow customers to have this kind of best of breed approach where they can assemble whatever technology that they want. Where do you see kind of like the partnership element of the localization ecosystem playing in how brands are scaling globally? And is there more opportunities for maybe enterprise customers to maybe be a little bit more risk taking or innovative with some of the decisions they make because the technology is now there for them to do so?
I think we we see that across the most innovative customers that we work with. Typically the very sort of large competitive brands, they are very partner focused. CaptionHub has never been a solution that can solve all of our customers' needs in isolation. We have to integrate into video technology. We have to integrate into orchestration, localization technology. So the ecosystem has always been really important for us, but now it's so much busier and more dynamic. And I just think that's amazing. That's a real reflection of where we've got to in technology, in the evolution of technology. And so the way I think about this now, the way I think about ecosystem is, I think within the framework of ecosystem responsibility. So how can we, as a technology actor, be a responsible actor? How can we play nicely and elegantly with other technologies in support of our customers' problems? How can we solve those together? And that, at a ground level, that includes basic things like having top-tier API docs, having SDKs, having a very clear narrative around what we do and what we don't support. It might not be that we can support this particular use case for you. Is there a partner that can work with us quickly? Can we spin that partner up quickly, commercially, technically? Can they integrate quickly? It's not always possible to connect with everything and integrate with everything. It's there is a limiting factor there in terms of dev resource, and so that's where those strategic relationships, such as the relationship we have with Blackbird, comes in. That's a genuine plug, because I think what Blackbird is doing in the industry is absolutely fascinating, connecting all the nodes. So there is that element of responsibility, ecosystem responsibility, ensuring that you're creating a healthy ecosystem, and that if you're be aware that you're in an ecosystem and that others are going to be in that ecosystem, whether or not you're serving that client or not, or whether or not you're serving all of the things that you want to be serving for that client, if you've got a full value fit or not. And so it's just really important to have that level of responsibility from a technology standpoint, to be thinking about engineering in a smart way, but also commercial partnerships. And the bottom line is, if you're able to innovate and solve problems well in the ecosystem, then you're always going to have a good shot at solving problems for the biggest customers. So I don't think there needs to be a fear factor in there. I think there's a really nice way that technology companies can play together. So that's my plug on ecosystem responsibility.
No, and I'm totally agree. And it's the simplest of concepts. It's like, I want to make it easy to make your life easier. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of people with change management and struggling with like, okay, but now I got to do this and now I got to do this to make my life easier, it just becomes overwhelming. So to me, it's like, great. If you live in an environment like Jira, day in and day out, if that's the system that you live in a day in and day out, then any action or any decision you make in that system should be able then to trigger whatever you want. So if you want to trigger the creation of captions in CaptionHub, you should not have to go to another place. Live in your natural habitat, make the decisions, make the changes you want to where you're comfortable, and that
Yeah.
should be a limiting factor to streamlining, reducing your costs, making your life easier, and tapping into great technology. And I think that's one of my mission statements, is to when I'm sitting with our customers, is to say, hey, I don't want you to have to change a lot of what you're doing unless you want to change what you're doing. If you've recognized this as an inefficiency in your process, we'll fully embrace it. But if you like working in this system, great. Let's
Yeah.
build the workflows around you working in this system, and then automate around that, and not feel that you need to do things manually because you don't want to change to do something better.
Right, exactly. So it's like, how do you integrate? First of all, how do you provide that integration pathway in the most seamless possible way, commercially and technically? And then how do you ensure from that point onwards that you are providing the most resilient, secure layer for that integration? Because what you're doing there is you're creating trust based on the delivery, the ongoing ability for you to deliver in that ecosystem. And that trust, going full circle back to brand equity, we talked about this at the start, that trust really underpins that brand equity. It's really, incredibly important as that immediate value of, okay, so we've removed the factory floor level inefficiency there, because I can now create captions without having to go into the application to turn it on. It's running headlessly through my AWS integration. Every time I've got a broadcast, it will pull language straight out of Blackbird. It will feed that through into my real time, and then it will publish that out into whoever's watching it on any device around the world. But it's that resilience that that then builds the trust and the brand equity, but just that then underpins the entire ecosystem, because you've got, rather than you've got this sort of foundation that allows you to have these continued mutual transactions that co-serve over long periods of time. And it is simple, it's about building long-lasting either relationships or technology foundations, or both, really, that can serve our customers' problems.
Listen, I think there is just a world of opportunity for brands out there, and I'm so excited when I do see brands making these bold and right decisions, as I feel, and I think others are going to pick up, and I think it's going to be really great for CaptionHub, and just, I think in general, I think it's going to be great for the localization industry moving forwards.
I think we think about enterprise, and we think about the business world in terms of sort of large brands and corporates. And I think what's also really interesting in terms of a dynamic in this space right now is the creator economy, but genuinely the creator economy and the impact that is having in terms of distribution. So we've got this audience attention span that's shorter than ever before, global audience genuinely in reach. It's a very, very cool but scary time to be alive. So we're rapidly heading into this sort of open source distribution monopoly. We've never had media distribution monopoly, maybe once in the 30s, where there were sort of theaters in the US. But this is the first time we're heading towards a true distribution monopoly with YouTube, that is really taking a lot monopolizing the distribution. And we've got creators that are becoming billionaires or near billionaires overnight. So Kobe Lame, sold his business to Rich Sparkle last week for 900 million. So nearly a billion. Just put that into context, that you can list on the FTSE 100 with a £6 billion revenue company. We in the UK minted 15 unicorns last year. And there we have a 26-year-old Senegalese immigrant who 6 years ago was a machine worker in Turin, was laid off, and armed with an iPhone, created $1 billion value business with YouTube. And that is about global reach. That tells you the sort of coefficient tightness between localization and global reach, which is a very cool dynamic in the background to think about how very large brands are going to compete with these creators.
Oh, that's amazing. So my silly question to you: are you going to the NBA game?
Sure.
Are you planning to go to the NBA game?
I'm not going to the NBA game. I am going to admit I've never been to an NBA game. I would love to. It's on my list. So yeah.
Awesome. James, thank you so much for taking the time to join me and talk. And it was a fascinating conversation, and look forward to talking more in the future. And with that, we'll close out another episode of the Shift Left podcast. And all the deals, you subscribe, follow us on LinkedIn, follow James on LinkedIn. There'll be information in the description here. And until next time, bird watchers, keep watching to the sky for more awesome stuff coming soon. Later.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Dan.